Hello everyone and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, where we gently unearth the fascinating intricacies of the past to help you drift into a peaceful night. Tonight we're embarking on a delicate journey through the rigid yet profoundly human landscape of Victorian courtship and early marriage circa 1855, seen through the eyes of a young woman navigating its many unspoken rules. This era, seemingly distant, was shaped by profound social hierarchies and economic realities, all of which formed the quiet, often challenging backdrop to every personal aspiration and interaction. It was a time when the very act of seeking a partner was an intricate dance fraught with more peril and unspoken language than you might ever imagine. If this calm exploration of a bygone world resonates with you, a quiet subscribe and a thoughtful like are always appreciated, and it's always a gentle connection to know who's joining us in this historical drift. Feel free to share your location in the comments. Now allow your mind to softly drift as we journey back to an age where every glance, every gesture carried the weight of destiny. In the quiet gaslit parlours of Victorian England, young women like yourself, perhaps turning 22, often felt the invisible weight of an entire social system resting upon her shoulders. The air even indoors carried the faint, ever-present scent of coal smoke, a subtle reminder of London's industrial pulse, yet the immediate concern was far more personal, far more terrifying in its potential consequences. You see, Victorian courtship wasn't merely a quest for affection. It was a highly ritualised social dance governed by an almost impenetrable labyrinth of etiquette books and implicit social conventions. Every glance, every carefully chosen word, every subtle tilt of the head carried significant weight, forming a silent language that could either open doors to a respectable future or with the slightest misstep jeopardise one's entire reputation and by extension all marital prospects. Imagine, if you will, the constant internal monologue, the protagonist's initial terror as she navigated this complex system where the fear of misinterpretation loomed, larger than any whispered confession of love. It was a world where a lady might spend hours rehearsing a single compliment, not for its profundity, but for its perfect adherence to the unwritten rules of propriety. You could almost feel the tight coil of anxiety in your chest, knowing that a blush might be misinterpreted as forwardness, or a moment of genuine laughter as unseemly gaiety. The societal gaze was omnipresent, and every interaction was in essence a performance designed not for personal expression, but for social approval. It was a performance you dared not fail, for the stakes were simply too high. This intricate web of expectations, where every move was scrutinised, truly set the stage for how affection and status were silently communicated, paving the way for a deeper understanding of the non-verbal cues that formed the very bedrock of Victorian interaction. Following the initial terror of navigating the labyrinth of unspoken rules, you would quickly come to understand that much of Victorian courtship transpired not through grand declarations, but through the delicate ballet of non-verbal cues. In a society where overt displays of emotion or direct statements of intent were often considered vulgar gestures, and appearances conveyed profound meaning, frequently transcending the spoken word altogether. Imagine encountering a gentleman on the street. He might offer a brief, almost imperceptible touching of his top hat, a subtle acknowledgement that, while fleeting, spoke volumes about his respect for you, even if you were complete strangers. It was precise coded language designed to maintain decorum while subtly communicating status and intent. For a woman, the rules were even more stringent. Prolonged eye contact, for instance, was strictly forbidden, often deemed brazen, a direct challenge to the era's ideals of female modesty and demureness. A lady's gaze was meant to be fleeting, perhaps a gentle downward glance, acknowledging without inviting, hinting at interest without overtly displaying it. It's almost comical to consider how much emotional real estate was contained within a single blink, isn't it? This silent lexicon extended beyond mere greetings. The way a woman held her fan, the precise angle of her head, the slight inclination of her parasol, all could communicate nuances of interest, disinterest, or even polite dismissal. A gentleman's careful posture, the way he presented his gloved hand during a formal introduction, the exact distance he maintained during a promenade. These weren't simply matters of good manners, but vital components of the courtship narrative. You might observe a potential suitor keenly attuned to these details, trying to decipher his earnestness, not from what he said, but from the subtle tension in his shoulders, or the fleeting softness in his eyes. There was an entire grammar of the body, a nuanced vocabulary of movement that every well-bred individual was expected to master. This was particularly true in crowded social settings where private words were impossible, but a shared knowing glance across a ballroom could speak volumes. It was a constant exercise in observation and interpretation, a skill honed from childhood. Consider the intricacies of a formal call where a gentleman might pay his respect in your drawing room. His choice of clothing, not overly ostentatious but impeccably tailored, his polished boots, the way he carried his gloves. These weren't just sartorial choices but visual declarations of his economic standing and attention to detail. Your own carefully chosen gown, the intricate pinning of your hair, the very angle at which you sat on the settee. These were all part of your non-verbal reply. It was a highly sophisticated system of signalling, ensuring that before a single meaningful word was spoken, both parties had already conveyed a wealth of information about their character, their family, and their intentions. This silent conversation, rich in detail and layered with hidden meanings, ensured that by the time you actually opened your mouth to speak, a complex foundation of understanding, or misunderstanding, had already been laid, making the subsequent verbal exchanges even more fraught with careful calculation. As the silent language of gestures and appearances established initial impressions, the true test of compatibility often unfolded in the calculated art of conversation and intellectual performance. For Victorian ladies, the expectation was clear: you were to demonstrate intelligence and engage in conversation that transcended mere trivialities, particularly during formal visits. This wasn't about debating philosophy or challenging societal norms, of course. Far from it. The delicate balance involved appearing engaging without being perceived as unfeminine, threatening, or heaven forbid too forward. It was a tightrope walk, often requiring careful phrasing to express differing viewpoints, gently perhaps with a qualifying phrase like, "One might venture to suggest," or "It occurs to me that perhaps," to soften any hint of intellectual assertiveness. Imagine the mental gymnastics involved in offering a witty observation on current events without sounding immodest, or discussing a new novel with enthusiasm that never quite tipped into passionate advocacy. A well-bred lady was expected to be knowledgeable about literature, art, and perhaps a touch of polite politics, but always within strict unwritten boundaries. You might discuss the latest exhibition at the Royal Academy, or comment on a recent parliamentary debate, but your opinions were to be offered with grace and deference, never with an air of absolute conviction. The goal was to prove your suitability as a future wife and hostess, someone who could entertain guests with agreeable conversation and subtly manage social dynamics rather than dominate them. You were performing for a potential partner, certainly, but also for his parents, who would be observing your every utterance, weighing your words not just for content but for propriety. This meant the careful avoidance of anything controversial, too personal, or emotionally charged. Think of it as intellectual sparring, but with velvet gloves and a strict rule book. Even when discussing seemingly innocuous topics such as the weather or the beauty of a garden, a certain intellectual depth was subtly woven in. You might comment on the botanical precision of a particular flower, or lament the unpredictable nature of London fogs with a literary allusion. The aim was to show a cultivated mind, one capable of appreciating beauty and order, without ever overshadowing your male counterpart. It was a performance of gentle wit, a display of refined thought, always modulated to ensure you remained charming and approachable. The entire interaction was designed to reveal your accomplishments and your capacity for agreeable companionship, all while preserving the delicate societal balance. And as you navigated these verbal intricacies, the unspoken rules governing physical proximity and touch remained a constant, almost palpable barrier, waiting for the slightest misstep to turn a polite encounter into a social disaster. Beyond the meticulously crafted conversations and the silent language of gestures lay an even more perilous territory for the unmarried Victorian woman any form of physical contact. This was a realm fraught with such profound social implications that the mere thought of it could send shivers down your spine. In an era where propriety was paramount, any physical interaction between unmarried individuals, no matter how fleeting, was laden with potential scandal. Handshakes, for instance, were brief, almost formal affairs permitted only upon a formal introduction by a father or a respected elderly chaperone. It was a gesture of polite acknowledgement utterly devoid of warmth or lingering touch. Imagine the tension as a gentleman's gloved hand briefly met yours, a fleeting brush that felt more like a duty than a connection. But then consider the almost illicit thrill of a moment perhaps when exchanging a small bouquet of flowers, where gloved fingers might for the briefest instant brush against each other. Etiquette books might not explicitly forbid this accidental touch, but the social consciousness of the era certainly amplified its significance. That brief electric shock of illicit intimacy, a fleeting spark in a world otherwise so physically constrained, highlighted the strict boundaries that existed before engagement. It was a moment that could linger in the mind, a silent rebellion against the rigid rules, a tiny crack in the carefully constructed facade of Victorian decorum. This was the most intimate physical contact one could hope for prior to a formal commitment, and its rarity only amplified its power. Think about the sheer impossibility of casual affection. No comforting arm around the waist, no gentle hand on the back, no innocent linking of arms during a stroll. Such gestures, commonplace and unthinking in our time, were scandalous propositions in theirs. The physical space between unengaged men and women was meticulously maintained, a visible manifestation of the social distance that was expected. This rigid enforcement of personal space meant that genuine intimacy, the kind built through shared physical comfort, was almost entirely deferred until after the wedding vows were exchanged. This deferred gratification, however, made the smallest permissible gestures like that accidental brushing of fingers incredibly potent, imbuing them with a significance we can barely comprehend today. It was a society that understood the power of touch, and therefore meticulously controlled its expression, channeling all physical desire into the sanctity of marriage. And just as physical contact was strictly regulated, so too was the exchange of gifts, each offering carrying its own precise and often perilous social weight. Building upon the strictures governing physical contact, the act of gift-giving during courtship was another carefully choreographed ritual, a measured exchange fraught with social peril. Accepting a gift from a suitor not yet formally engaged was by all accounts a severe social misstep. It implied an inappropriate encouragement of his attentions, suggesting a level of commitment that had not yet been formally established, and potentially leading a gentleman on. etiquette books, those ubiquitous guides to proper conduct were explicit in their warnings. The Young Lady's Friend. A widely consulted manual might caution a young woman that accepting even one seemingly innocuous gift could escalate into an expectation of further, more intimate exchanges, thereby compromising her reputation. The underlying message was clear: maintain distance, avoid obligation, and certainly avoid any impression of impropriety. This created a peculiar dilemma for a gentleman wishing to express his serious intent beyond mere words. How could one subtly convey deep admiration or growing affection without crossing the line into impropriety? The answer surprisingly often lay in the fleeting beauty of flowers. Flowers, being temporary and modest, emerged as the rare, permissible exception to the strict gift-giving protocol. A gentleman could send a carefully chosen bouquet, perhaps sweet peas, as Thomas did for our protagonist, without implying an unbreakable bond or incurring social censure. The subtle language of florography, the Victorian art of conveying meaning through flowers, allowed for a discreet communication of serious intent without the outright impropriety associated with more permanent or valuable gifts. A red rose for passionate love, a violet for modesty, sweet peas for delicate pleasure. Each bloom held a quiet, coded message understood by those initiated into the secret language of the garden. Yet even with flowers, an unspoken understanding existed. Too frequent a delivery or a bouquet that was excessively lavish could still raise eyebrows. It was a delicate dance between expressing genuine interest and maintaining impeccable decorum. Imagine the anxious consideration on the part of the suitor, poring over the meanings of various blossoms, weighing the social implications of a single lily versus a small posy of forget-me-nots. And on the part of the recipient, the quiet thrill of receiving a bouquet, knowing the subtle message it conveyed, while simultaneously ensuring her reaction remained appropriately reserved. This measured exchange, designed to protect reputations and maintain social order, underscored the immense pressure on both parties to navigate the treacherous waters of Victorian courtship with utmost care. It was a constant reminder that every aspect of the interaction, from a shared glance to a carefully selected bloom, was under perpetual scrutiny, not just by the couple themselves, but by the ever-present eyes of their vigilant chaperones. If the nuances of non-verbal cues and gift-giving weren't enough to contend with the ever-present chaperone served as the ultimate tangible barrier to intimacy, reinforcing social control at every turn. Every single interaction between unmarried individuals, and indeed even between engaged couples, occurred under the vigilant eyes of a chaperone. This wasn't merely a polite suggestion. It was an absolute requirement, a non-negotiable aspect of Victorian courtship. Typically, this watchful guardian was a mother or a maiden aunt, a seasoned veteran of societal expectations, whose very presence framed the couple's activities and ensured propriety. You would never, for instance, find yourself alone in a room with a potential suitor, not even for a moment. It was simply unthinkable. Imagine trying to have a genuinely personal conversation to truly gauge the character and heart of another person, with Aunt Caroline's stern demeanour and eagle eyes fixed on your every move. During a formal call in the parlour, your mother might strategically position herself on the settee, perhaps with her needlework close enough to hear every whispered word, yet far enough to feign disinterest. It was an elaborate performance of casual surveillance, often framing the couple's activities in a way that rendered genuine privacy utterly impossible. This constant supervision extended beyond the confines of the home. A visit to a museum, a stroll in the park, or a momentous excursion to a public event like the Crystal Palace. All were undertaken with the chaperone firmly in tow. Her role was not simply to prevent impropriety, but to project an image of impeccable respectability to the wider world. The chaperone's presence was a constant, almost theatrical reminder of the social stakes involved. Every laugh had to be measured, every leaning in for a quiet word instantly corrected by a subtle cough or a pointed glance. For the suitor, this meant an even greater degree of self-control, as any attempt to circumvent the chaperone's watchfulness would be seen as a grave disrespect, potentially ruining his chances entirely. For the young lady, it was a test of patience and composure, maintaining a demure front even as her heart might be racing. This pervasive system of chaperonage wasn't just about preventing scandal. It was about ensuring that the entire process of courtship remained within prescribed social bounds, serving as a powerful deterrent against any deviation from the expected path. It underscored that a marriage was not just a private union but a public affirmation of social order, meticulously managed and observed. Yet even within these rigid constraints, communication found ways to evolve, slowly transitioning from formal pleasantries to a more profound exchange, particularly through the quiet intimacy of written words. Despite the omnipresent chaperones and the labyrinthine rules of social interaction, human connection, as it always does, found a way to deepen. The courtship, a process initially defined by stiff formal parlour conversations, gradually evolved into more natural dialogues. This shift wasn't sudden, nor was it outwardly dramatic. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible softening of the rigid boundaries, allowing for glimpses of genuine personality to emerge. You might notice, for instance, a suitor's quiet wit surfacing during a discussion of a shared hobby, or your own carefully guarded opinions emerging with a touch more confidence than you initially dared. The formality didn't disappear entirely, of course, but it began to fray at the edges, revealing the individual beneath the societal veneer. This gradual easing of formality found its most significant expression in unguarded walks, often in a carefully chosen public park, still under the watchful eye of a chaperone, but perhaps at a slightly greater distance. These strolls away from the structured confines of the drawing room allowed for a different rhythm of conversation. The gentle pace, the surrounding nature, the less intense scrutiny of the immediate environment, all conspired to foster a more relaxed exchange. You might find yourselves discussing dreams or childhood memories, venturing beyond the polite topics of art and weather. It was here, amidst the rustling leaves or the distant sounds of city life, that vulnerabilities and hopes began to be tentatively shared, moving beyond the strict social dictation that governed earlier interactions. But perhaps the most revolutionary shift in communication, the true conduit for deeply personal exchanges, came through letters. Letter writing, a cornerstone of Victorian communication, offered an unparalleled space for intimacy, a sanctuary away from the prying eyes and ears of society. Within the sealed envelope guarded by wax and quill, thoughts and feelings could be poured out with a freedom impossible in person. Thomas might confess a fear, or you might share a quiet ambition, knowing that these words were for your eyes only to be read and reread in the solitude of your private chamber. This written dialogue allowed for a vulnerability that was impossible in the presence of a chaperone, allowing for anxieties, unspoken desires, and genuine affection to blossom. It was through these carefully penned words, often eloquent and heartfelt, that the true measure of a person's character and inner world could be revealed, forging a connection that transcended the superficial demands of social propriety. This deepening of emotional connection, fueled by the written word, also brought with it an increased sensitivity to the subtle sensory details that defined their calculated interactions. As the formal conversation slowly deepened into more personal exchanges, the sensory details of their calculated interactions became acutely, almost painfully pronounced. You wouldn't just hear words, you'd feel the atmosphere, the tension, the subtle shifts in the air around you. Imagine for a moment the low murmur of male voices from the entrance hall, a hushed prelude to a suitor's arrival. It was a sound that instantly signalled the start of a formal engagement, a quiet hum that set your nerves on edge, signifying the impending performance. This wasn't the raucous laughter of friends or the comforting drone of family chatter. It was a specific modulated sound that meant business, a signal to compose yourself. Then there was the quiet rustle of skirts, a sound so ubiquitous in Victorian life, yet imbued with particular meaning during courtship. The delicate swish of a lady's petticoats as she moved with practised grace, or the subtle shifting of layers as she settled onto a settee, spoke volumes about her refinement and the meticulous attention to her appearance. It wasn't just fabric moving. It was the sound of a carefully cultivated image, every rustle a testament to the layers of social expectation. You could almost feel the stiffness of the whalebone, the precise arrangement of fabric, all contributing to the measured tempo of the interaction. And then there was the electric silence during moments of heightened tension. This wasn't the comfortable silence of shared understanding, but the taut, pregnant pause before a significant question, a veiled compliment, or an implied proposal. In a room where spoken words were often so carefully chosen and veiled, these silences became magnified, each tick of the grandfather clock, each distant street noise seeming to punctuate the unspoken. It was in these suspended moments that true intentions, anxieties, and hidden desires seemed to pulse, just beneath the surface, a silent scream of expectation. You could feel the weight of unspoken thoughts, the pressure of unasked questions hanging in the air like London's pervasive smog. These sensory experiences, the murmur, the rustle, the electric silence, weren't mere background details. They were active participants in the courtship ritual. They heightened the awareness, sharpened the senses, making every movement, every sound a part of the grand unspoken narrative. They served as a constant reminder of the stakes involved, the meticulous effort required to navigate this social minefield. And as our protagonist honed her senses to these subtle atmospheric cues, she simultaneously mastered the more overt performances required of an ideal Victorian bride meticulously crafting herself for public display. Having mastered the subtle sensory cues and the art of conversation, a young lady was then expected to refine a set of more tangible skills, her accomplishments. These weren't cultivated for personal brilliance or passionate pursuit, mind you, but primarily as a public display, a meticulously curated showcase of her suitability as a future wife and mistress of a household. Imagine spending countless hours at the pianoforte practicing scales and delicate melodies until your fingers ached, not because of a profound love for music, but because the ability to play a few charming tunes was a non-negotiable part of your marital display. The clear, precise notes of the pianoforte floating through the drawing room during a social call were a testament to your proper education and refined upbringing. Alongside musical proficiency, a smattering of French was essential enough to read a passage from a literary work, or offer a polite phrase demonstrating a cultured mind without delving into true fluency. Proficient needlework was another cornerstone. The intricate patterns of embroidery, the delicate stitches that transformed plain fabric into works of art were not just hobbies. They were visual proof of your patience, your domesticity, and your ability to manage a household with meticulous attention to detail. Picture yourself hunched over a canvas, the careful scratch of a pencil, during sketching, painstakingly rendering a landscape or a still life. These artistic endeavours, too, were part of the measured tempo of a lady's accomplished day, contributing to the overall impression of refinement and industry. These accomplishments were in essence a resume presented in a genteel domestic package. They signalled to potential suitors and their families that you possessed the decorum, the discipline and the quiet grace expected of a lady. They weren't about individual genius, but about conformity to a societal ideal. A woman who could play the piano, converse in a foreign tongue, and manage her embroidery frame with skill was not merely talented. She was well-bred, well-trained, and ready for the duties of married life. The very act of performing these accomplishments was itself a performance. Each note struck, each stitch sewn, each line sketched, contributing to the overall narrative of the ideal Victorian bride. And this careful cultivation of skills was mirrored by an equally rigorous attention to physical presentation, ensuring every movement and expression during social calls was a flawless performance in itself. The cultivation of accomplishments seamlessly transitioned into the meticulous performance of grace and composure required during every social call. For a Victorian lady, every movement, every expression was under scrutiny, a continuous act designed to uphold an image of modesty and refinement. Imagine the sheer physical discipline involved in navigating layers of skirts and petticoats. You had to sit gracefully, allowing your voluminous skirts to settle around you in an attractive arrangement without a single ripple of awkwardness. Rising smoothly without showing any effort despite the restrictive corsetry was another silent declaration of poise. It was a testament to hours of practice, a subtle art form performed with effortless precision. Your complexion, too, was a crucial part of this performance. A fashionably pale complexion was highly desired, a clear sign that you were a lady of leisure, untouched by the sun's harsh rays or the demands of her outdoor labour. Any hint of a rosy cheek or a tan might suggest an improper engagement with the working world, or even worse, a robust vitality considered unladylike. So you might avoid bright sunlight or apply subtle powders to achieve that ethereal, delicate pallor. It wasn't about looking healthy, but about looking exquisitely refined and delicate, embodying the era's ideal of feminine fragility. The micro-narrative of our protagonist meticulously practicing her sitting and standing is not simply a charming detail. It underscores the pervasive physical discipline demanded by social performance. You would consciously think about how you entered a room, how you offered your hand, how you listened, how you smiled. A gentle, almost imperceptible curve of the lips, never a wide, boisterous grin. The goal was to project an air of serene composure, never revealing the internal anxieties or frustrations that might simmer beneath the surface. Every gesture, from the way you held a teacup to the gentle nod of your head in agreement, was part of a carefully orchestrated ballet designed to impress. It was a performance that rarely, if ever, allowed for spontaneity or unguarded expression. This constant self-regulation, this meticulous attention to every outward detail was not just about appearance. It was a profound statement of social status, interwoven with the equally meticulous art of grooming that further underscored a lady's place in society. Just as every social movement was a deliberate performance, so too was the meticulous art of grooming, serving as a powerful, unspoken statement of social status. A Victorian lady's attire and elaborate hairstyling were not mere matters of personal preference. They were meticulously crafted to convey specific social messages, innocence, modesty, and above all, impeccable good breeding. Imagine the hours spent in preparation each day. The gown, with its layers of fabric and intricate fastenings, was a carefully chosen declaration of your family's financial standing and adherence to current fashion. It was a tangible representation of your position in the rigid social hierarchy. But it was perhaps the hair that received the most painstaking attention. The elaborate process of hair pinning the precise parting of strands, the careful arrangement of curls framing the face. This was often an arduous ritual, typically aided by a maid. The silky feel of freshly brushed hair, meticulously smoothed and coiled, would be followed by the distinct heavy scent of hair pomade used to hold every strand perfectly in place. The visual symmetry of the carefully arranged curls perhaps cascading down to frame a delicate ear, or coiled at the nape of the neck, was not just about aesthetics. It was about order control and the presentation of a flawless, socially acceptable image. Any stray wisps, any hint of disarray would be considered a mark of slovenliness, an affront to the carefully constructed facade of refinement. The very act of requiring a maid for this daily ritual underscored the social distinctions. Only those with sufficient means could afford such assistance, freeing the lady of the house from the physical labour of preparing herself, allowing her to maintain her desired pale complexion and delicate hands. The maid with nimble fingers would navigate the intricate braids and pins, ensuring every detail was perfect before her mistress descended for the day. This wasn't merely about beauty, it was about demonstrating leisure, an absence of manual labour, and the presence of domestic staff. It spoke of a household managed with precision, reflecting directly on the lady's capabilities as a future mistress. Every pin, every curl, every brushstroke contributed to this curated appearance, a visual affirmation of one's place within the societal framework, and a preparation for the carefully managed opportunities to assess compatibility through shared leisure activities. With one's appearance meticulously curated, the carefully managed opportunities for couples to assess intellectual compatibility and shared interests often materialized in socially acceptable leisure activities. These were not spontaneous outings, but structured engagements designed to allow interaction within firmly established boundaries. Imagine engaging in a polite discussion about the merits of Tennyson's latest poem, or meticulously poring over a collection of engravings from a distant land. These activities served as a safe haven, a gentle testing ground for intellectual alignment. The nuanced interpretations of a stanza, the shared appreciation for an artistic detail, these quiet moments offered glimpses into a potential partner's mind far beyond mere polite chit-chat. Reading aloud from the daily newspaper, particularly during a formal visit, was another such accepted activity. While seemingly mundane, it provided a structured way to gauge a suitor's voice, his grasp of current events, and his ability to engage in a calm, informed discussion. You might find yourselves debating gently, of course, the implications of a new trade agreement, or the latest scientific discovery, all while maintaining an air of detached academic interest. It was a subtle form of intellectual sparring, assessing how well your minds might intertwine in the long years of married life. Perhaps one of the most common and accepted shared leisure activities was taking walks in the park. Still under the watchful eye of a chaperone, these promenades offered a change of scenery and a less formal setting than the drawing room. Here, amidst the carefully cultivated nature of the public gardens, conversations could flow a little more freely. You might discuss the varieties of flowers, the beauty of the landscape, or simply enjoy the quiet rhythm of shared steps. Thomas bringing a book of engravings from India as our micro-narrative example suggests offered a particularly ingenious way to foster connection. This provided a tangible shared activity that allowed for natural conversation and observation, moving beyond mere polite niceties. It wasn't about the exotic locales depicted, but about the safe shared space it created for genuine interaction. These structured yet revealing activities were crucial for discerning a deeper connection, preparing the way for a more public declaration of serious intent. As the subtle assessments of intellectual compatibility progressed, a particularly significant milestone in Victorian courtship involved attending a public event together, especially a grand exhibition like the one at the Crystal Palace. This wasn't just a leisurely outing, it marked a substantial new level of courtship. It was in essence a semi-public declaration of keeping company, a step significantly beyond private parlour calls signalling serious intent to society at large. Imagine the sheer scale of the Crystal Palace, its 1,000 brilliant sparkles catching the light, a shimmering testament to human ingenuity. The very architecture, vast and gleaming, provided a dynamic backdrop to a relationship slowly blossoming under the intense public gaze. This public display, however, came with its own set of pressures. The noise and crowds of London streets, the bustling throngs of people, the distinct smell of industrial smoke outside the exhibition, all formed a vibrant, almost overwhelming sensory environment. Navigating this public spectacle together with your chaperone still firmly in tow was a test of composure and social grace. You were not just observing the marvels of the exhibition, you were also being observed, your every interaction noted by acquaintances, neighbours and the general public. It was a societal affirmation, a moment where the private intentions of two individuals were subtly announced to the broader community, highlighting the pervasive social pressures that shaped dating choices and dictated the pace of a burgeoning relationship. Despite the grandeur and the crowds, or perhaps precisely because of them, discreet moments were sought to deepen personal connection, even within this public spectacle. You might find Thomas leaning closer, his voice dropping to a low register only you can hear, as he spoke about his growing attachment, testing the boundaries of public propriety while advancing your private courtship. This created a peculiar intimacy amidst the bustling throngs, a fragile sense of personal connection forming within the vast impersonal space of the exhibition hall. It was a delicate balance, performing for society while simultaneously seeking genuine connection within the tight confines of propriety. These shared public experiences, far from being purely recreational, served as crucial rites of passage in the Victorian courtship narrative, solidifying intentions and moving the relationship towards its inevitable spiritual and moral framework. Beneath the meticulously choreographed social dances of courtship lay a profound spiritual framework intertwining with societal expectations to define the very morality of Victorian society. While perhaps not overtly superstitious in the way some cultures might be, certain domestic practices and the unwavering rhythms of the week, particularly Sunday visits, carried an immense moral weight. These weren't just social calls, they were anchors rooting daily life within a broader framework of propriety and religious observance. The Sunday call, for instance, often involved a quiet afternoon, perhaps discussing a sermon or reading scripture, imbuing the courtship with a solemnity that transcended mere flirtation. It was a subtle acknowledgement of the divine order that in the Victorian mind permeated every aspect of existence, including the pursuit of a spouse. The sense of sanctity surrounding the marriage ceremony itself was almost palpable. The solemnity of the vows exchanged, the ancient rituals performed in the hallowed space of a church, all imbued the union with a profound spiritual dimension. It was seen as a sacred covenant blessed by God and entered into with gravitas. This wasn't merely a legal contract. It was a spiritual merging, a commitment understood to extend beyond earthly life. You could almost feel the weight of tradition in the very air of the church, the echo of countless generations who had stood at the altar before you, making the same profound promises. Indeed, the pervasive influence of Victorian morality shaped every aspect of conduct, implicitly guiding behaviour with a powerful sense of right and wrong, often tied more to social acceptance than direct divine intervention. Our protagonist internalised guilt for feeling terrified about marriage rather than experiencing pure joy and anticipation highlights this strong moral pressure. It was not just about being proper, but feeling proper. Any deviation from the prescribed emotional response, any internal dissent, was cause for quiet shame. This moral compass, reinforced by familial and societal expectations, was a constant internal chaperone dictating not just actions, but emotions. This pervasive moral framework extended to the ritualistic aspects of key life transitions, further cementing the spiritual undertones of a Victorian woman's journey. The pervasive moral framework of Victorian society deeply infused the ritualistic aspects of key life transitions, elevating them beyond mere social events into profound transformations. Marriage in particular stood as a monumental rite of passage meticulously structured with formal rituals and traditions. From the carefully worded proposal often orchestrated through the father to the meticulously planned wedding ceremony, every step served both a crucial social purpose and an implicitly spiritual one. It was a public acknowledgement of the individual's new status, but also a spiritual ushering a formal transition into a new phase of existence with its own set of moral obligations and divine blessings. The very choice of date, the attire, the guest list, all are steeped in tradition, ensuring the event resonated with the collective moral consciousness of the community. Consider the intimate token of a carefully preserved lock of hair exchanged between engaged couples. This wasn't merely a sentimental gesture. It was an incredibly intimate symbol, carrying a weight beyond mere affection, hinting at a spiritual bonding before the physical union. In a society where physical contact was severely restricted prior to marriage, this small, tangible piece of another person, often kept close to the heart, represented a profound commitment, a nascent spiritual merging. It was a silent promise, a physical manifestation of a connection that transcended the corporeal, an unspoken vow of fidelity. You could almost feel the delicate strands holding the promise of a future intertwined. This emphasis on ritual and moral gravitas extended beyond the wedding itself, profoundly shaping the progression of intimacy within the relationship. The gradual revelation of trust and shared vulnerability between the couple, particularly after engagement, allowed for a deeper, almost spiritual connection to form one that transcended the strictures of societal expectations. Thomas's confession of his nightmares, perhaps stemming from his time abroad, or the protagonist's quiet fears about motherhood, were not merely exchanges of information. They were acts of profound trust, laying bare the true selves beneath the carefully constructed facades. This shared vulnerability, built on mutual trust and acceptance, formed the bedrock of a connection that was far more enduring than superficial charm or societal approval. The emotional depth that emerged from these shared vulnerabilities, the pure joy in Thomas's eyes when informed of the pregnancy, the raw relief after his fever broke the simple comfort of knowing we're going to be all right, underscored the profound emotional and indeed spiritual bond that developed. It was in these moments of shared human experience, stripped of polite performance, that the true nature of their partnership began to manifest, moving from a practical arrangement to a profound living alliance shaped by shared experiences and a growing, resilient affection. For all the elaborate dances of social etiquette and the subtle spiritual undertones, the fundamental truth of Victorian marriage remained brutally pragmatic. It was first and foremost an alliance. For women of all classes, it was an economic necessity and a path to securing social standing. It was viewed as a practical arrangement, with the romantic ideal of affection, ideally growing within the union, rather than preceding it a gentle bloom after the seeds of necessity had been planted. Imagine the quiet, almost clinical discussions behind closed doors weighing a suitor's prospects. His family connections, his ability to provide long before any thought of emotional compatibility. The constrained agency of women during this era meant their destiny was almost entirely contingent on finding a suitable husband. At 22, the protagonist would have felt the immense suffocating pressure of approaching the age where people will start whispering about you being on the shelf. This wasn't merely a social slight, it was a devastating prognosis. An unmarried woman past a certain age faced a future of limited choices, often relegated to the role of a maiden aunt or a governess, a life without the financial security or social respectability afforded by marriage. The societal repercussions for remaining unmarried were severe, highlighting the incredibly narrow path available for female fulfillment. This stark reality contrasted sharply with the romantic ideals spun in popular novels. The chaste nature of courtship, with its rigid physical boundaries, stood in direct opposition to the passionate declarations of fictional lovers. Physical intimacy, often discussed in careful euphemisms, was viewed with a mixture of trepidation and duty, a necessary aspect of married life rather than a romantic crescendo. You can almost feel the protagonist's face burn with embarrassment, as Aunt Margaret, with a cautious delicacy, explains the physical aspects of marriage, offering practical information born of necessity rather than joyful anticipation. This candid, if euphemistic, discussion highlights the profound pragmatism that underpinned the institution, stripping away any lingering romantic illusions. It was this profound practicality, this economic imperative, that formed the unspoken bedrock of countless Victorian unions. Love, if it came at all, was a bonus, a gentle companion that might develop over years of shared duties and quiet companionship. The expectation was not for a passionate romance, but for a stable, respectable partnership that served both individual and familial interests. This quiet acceptance of marriage as a practical alliance laid the groundwork for the gradual evolution of affection and intimacy, post-engagement a revolutionary shift in their carefully constructed world. The very moment of engagement, that formal declaration of intent, marked a truly significant shift in the Victorian courtship. It wasn't just a social announcement, it was a quiet revolution in personal connection, allowing for previously forbidden intimacies, the most potent of which was the simple act of holding hands. After months of careful distance, of meticulously maintained physical separation, the warm and slightly calloused feel of Thomas's hands intertwining with yours would have been a profound, almost electric experience. It felt natural, yet utterly novel, a sensory explosion in a world starved of casual touch. This simple, deeply intimate physical connection was a tangible symbol of their transformed status, moving them beyond mere formal politeness into genuine fondness and eventually a burgeoning love. This newfound intimacy wasn't about passionate embraces, of course, but about a gentle, comforting closeness. Shared silences became less fraught with tension and more imbued with a quiet understanding. Walks in the park, though, still often chaperoned, now allowed for a hand casually resting on an arm, a fleeting brush of shoulders. These small permissible gestures fostered a new ease between the couple, allowing their emotional connection to deepen in ways previously impossible. The conversations once so carefully modulated could now venture into slightly more personal territories, discussing future plans, shared dreams, and even quiet fears. The engagement period was a bridge allowing the couple to slowly acclimate to the idea of a shared life, to begin the delicate process of unveiling their true selves beyond the rigid, parlour performance they had maintained for so long. Thomas might confess a secret ambition, or you might reveal a quiet frustration knowing that these tentative disclosures were met with acceptance rather than judgment. It was a time for cautious exploration, for discovering the individual beneath the carefully constructed societal facade. This period, often lasting many months, provided a crucial space for the seeds of genuine affection to take root, nurtured by small acts of intimacy and the burgeoning comfort of shared confidence. It was a gradual shedding of the formal skin, preparing them for the profound revelations that marriage itself would bring, where the true self, with all its imperfections, would finally be unveiled. The transition to marriage, far from being the end of a performance, was in fact the beginning of a profound unveiling, allowing the couple to reveal their authentic selves beyond the carefully constructed parlour performance. Imagine the quiet revelations that unfolded once the societal gaze was to some extent lessened. Thomas's nightmares perhaps stemming from his time in India, or his struggles with bouts of melancholy, might finally be shared in the intimate quiet of their new home. These weren't the polished anecdotes suitable for a drawing room. They were the raw, unfiltered vulnerabilities of a real man previously hidden beneath a veneer of stoicism. And equally our protagonist's own true nature, perhaps her quick temper, her stubborn independence, or her quiet intellectual ambitions could now slowly emerge. During courtship, such traits might have been carefully suppressed, deemed unladylike or too assertive. But within the safety of their developing marriage, these imperfections, these facets of her genuine self, became known and crucially accepted. It was a profound shift from presenting an idealized version of oneself to being seen and embraced for who one truly was, flaws and all. This acceptance, this shared understanding of vulnerability, demonstrated that love deepened not through flawless presentation, but through shared imperfections and mutual comfort. Consider the weight of Thomas admitting he was terrified for weeks, that she might refuse him a vulnerability he could never have expressed during the formal stages of their courtship, or his later even more revealing confession that she was the first woman I'd met who spoke to me like I was a person, rather than a potential husband. This micronarrative example captures the essence of their evolving relationship, a profound emotional truth forged in the safety and trust of their developing bond. It was a recognition of shared humanity, a connection that transcended the transactional nature of Victorian marital arrangements. This unveiling, this slow shedding of facades, transformed a practical alliance into something far more profound, a journey of shared discovery laying the groundwork for a genuine partnership. As the layers of parlour performance peeled away, revealing authentic selves, marriage itself transformed from a static state into a dynamic journey of shared discovery and partnership. It was far more than a legal union. It became a living, breathing entity based on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of affection that remarkably grew stronger rather than weaker over time. Imagine the daily practicalities that cemented this bond, the mundane yet profoundly unifying tasks of running a household. From managing the budget and overseeing servants to planning meals and maintaining social obligations, these shared responsibilities forged an unbreakable connection. The practicalities of Victorian life didn't allow for much idleness, even for the mistress of a middle-class home. Raising children, for instance, became a shared endeavour, though roles were clearly defined. You would navigate the joys and challenges of parenthood together, each milestone a new thread weaving your lives closer. And when illness inevitably struck, as it often did in the Victorian era, facing it together transformed distant acquaintance into profound companionship. Thomas's fever, for example, becoming a crisis not just for him but for them, solidified their reliance on one another. The raw relief upon his recovery, the simple unspoken comfort of knowing we're going to be all right, underscored the resilience of their developing bond. This journey wasn't always smooth, of course. There would be disagreements, moments of frustration, the inevitable challenges of two distinct personalities learning to navigate a shared existence. But it was through these shared experiences, these quiet battles won and lost, that their partnership deepened. Love, initially a quiet sprout, flourished into a sturdy oak, rooted in the fertile ground of shared responsibilities and mutual support. It moved beyond the initial expectations of a suitable match, evolving into a true companionship, where each person contributed to the collective well-being. This profound evolution highlighted the inherent power of the clan identity, the collective imperative that often overshadowed individual desires, and which would continue to shape their lives even after personal love had blossomed. Even as individual affection blossomed into profound partnership, the overarching influence of clan identity, or remained a pervasive and powerful force in Victorian society. Individual actions, particularly regarding marriage, were never truly private matters. They directly impacted the collective reputation and financial well-being of the entire family. A good marriage was not simply a personal choice or a romantic ideal. It was a strategic move, a carefully calculated alliance that could solve several of the family's financial concerns and secure your future. Imagine the pressure of knowing that your personal happiness was inextricably linked to the economic stability and social ascent of your entire lineage. This burden, a heavy cloak woven from generations of expectation, underscored the collective imperative over individual desires. The maintenance of the family's social standing required significant investment, both in terms of social capital and financial outlay. Consider the wedding dress, a garment of immense symbolic and monetary value. That cost more than your father's shop earns in 2 months. This wasn't extravagance for its own sake. It was a necessary expenditure justified by its essential role in preserving the family's reputation and signalling their respectability to the wider community. It was an investment in the family brand, a visual declaration that they were part of the respectable middle class, capable of upholding the necessary decorum and maintaining their place in the rigid social hierarchy. This multi-generational burden and benefit of individual choices within the family unit was a constant unspoken presence influencing every major decision. While our protagonist might have harboured secret ambitions, perhaps a quiet desire to travel or to pursue an artistic passion, her primary focus remained by necessity, aligned with societal expectations for marriage and domesticity. Any significant deviance from the expected path, remaining unmarried, choosing an unsuitable partner, or engaging in impropriety, would bring severe social judgment not only upon herself, but upon her entire lineage. This pervasive threat of social ostracization reinforced the profound suppression of personal desires in favor of familial duty. Your individual identity in many ways was subsumed by the collective, a single thread woven into a much larger intricate tapestry. This communal validation of major life events, particularly engagements and weddings, cemented the societal importance of these unions rooting individual lives within the broader social fabric, further emphasizing the public nature of supposedly private affairs. The public nature of Victorian life meant that engagements and weddings were far from private affairs. They were community events publicly announced in newspapers and celebrated with a wide circle of relatives and neighbours. This communal validation reinforced the societal importance of these unions, rooting individual lives firmly within the broader social fabric. Imagine the quiet buzz of gossip, the eager anticipation of the wedding day, the sense that an entire community was invested in your personal transition. It wasn't just your family celebrating. It was the grocer down the street, the vicar, the ladies from your mother's sewing circle, all marking this significant passage. Even after the wedding, the societal expectation to conform to uphold one's familial and community standing continued unabated. Marriage was not a release from social obligations, but a new set of responsibilities. Our protagonist's transformation into a pillar of your small community involved a continuous commitment to upholding her family's social standing. This meant organising charitable events, hosting successful dinner parties, participating in local benevolent societies, and generally exemplifying the ideals of Victorian womanhood. These activities weren't merely personal preferences. They were extensions of her new domestic role, reinforcing her position within the community and reflecting well upon her husband and his burgeoning career. It was a subtle yet constant performance of civic virtue. The lingering shadow of social judgment therefore never truly dissipated. Every aspect of her married life, from the cleanliness of her home to the behaviour of her children, remained to some extent subject to public scrutiny. Maintaining respectability was an ongoing endeavour, a continuous effort to align personal conduct with societal ideals. This pervasive oversight, while perhaps stifling to modern sensibilities, provided a kind of social cohesion, ensuring that individuals remained tethered to the collective values of their community. It underscored the fundamental truth that a Victorian woman's journey to partnership and self-discovery was always at its core deeply interwoven with the expectations and demands of her family and the wider society. This communal imperative, ever present in the background, subtly yet profoundly shaped the daily existence and personal realities of individuals, influencing everything from the chill in their homes to the food on their tables. Transitioning from the complex social rules that dictated the courtship ritual, we now delve into the tangible, sensory-rich, and often remarkably uncomfortable realities of everyday life for individuals in Victorian England. The grand social performances often masked a starker truth. Daily existence was frequently a battle against the elements and the limitations of technology. Take, for instance, the pervasive chill of unheated homes. Victorian residences, particularly those of the respectable middle class, lacked anything resembling central heating, ensuring a bone-deep chill that permeated stone walls, especially during the early morning hours. You'd wake to the frigid air, the feeling of rough cotton sheets, and the weight of a heavy quilt pressing down, offering little solace against the permeating cold that lingered for hours. Warmth, when it came, relied entirely on coal fires, a laborious and servant-dependent luxury. Housemaids like Mary would rise at an ungodly hour, their hands black with soot from carrying dozens of 30-pound coal scuttles to every fireplace in the house, a constant, physically demanding battle against the cold indoors. The crackle of the newly lit fire, the slow seep of warmth into a room, was a precious commodity, a daily ritual that underscored the constant struggle against a pervasive, almost sentient cold. It was a cold that wasn't just on your skin, but seemed to seep into the very foundations of the house, a constant atmospheric presence. Beyond the immediate discomfort of the indoors, London itself presented a relentless sensory assault. The city's dense population, its burgeoning industrial activity, and its woefully inadequate sanitation systems created a distinct and often profoundly unpleasant urban environment that infiltrated even private homes. Imagine the thick coal smoke hangs thick as fog, a grimy shroud that settled over everything, coating windowsills and clothes with a fine layer of soot. The incessant clatter of horse hooves against cobblestones, accompanied by the rumbling of carriages and the shouts of street vendors, formed a ceaseless din. and perhaps most unforgettably the smell of the Thames carrying all the waste from 2.5 million people drifting through open windows on a warm day, a powerful, pungent reminder of the city's overflowing challenges. This was the unspoken backdrop of every social call, every domestic routine, a tangible reality that contrasted sharply with the carefully curated internal worlds and underscored the surprising lack of personal privacy for women in this era. Amidst the constant chill and the clamour of the London life, another reality often surprising to modern sensibilities was the striking absence of personal privacy, particularly for women. For Victorian ladies, from childhood until marriage, privacy as we understand it was an almost alien concept. Housemaids were not merely domestic helpers, they were intimate companions in the most mundane yet personal aspects of daily life. They routinely assisted with dressing and undressing, from the intricate lacing of corsets to the careful pinning of hair. This wasn't a choice. It was the norm, highlighting the communal nature of personal care and the profound absence of individual solitude. Imagine Mary, your housemaid, unlacing your nightgown with practiced ease, having seen you naked thousands of times. This micro-narrative example vividly illustrates the normalized lack of personal space and the blurring of boundaries between mistress and maid. Your body, your personal routines were not exclusively your own. This continuous presence, this shared intimacy in the physical sense, meant that moments of true solitude were incredibly rare, reserved perhaps for a quiet moment, reading in your bedchamber after everyone else had retired. This pervasive lack of privacy also subtly underscored class-based variations in comfort and amenities. While your middle-class home offered decent clothes and food, the emphasis on its basic amenities, cold wooden floors, the reliance on manual fire lighting, subtly contrasted with the implied greater comforts and perhaps slightly more private arrangements of wealthier families. You might catch a glimpse of a wealthier lady's attire, noticing the finer fabrics or the more elaborate embellishments, a silent testament to the enhanced luxury that came with greater means. Even though privacy was limited across the board, the quality of personal care and the surrounding comforts varied significantly. However, the transition to a new household post-marriage, while initially daunting with its new responsibilities, presented a thrilling albeit relative opportunity for autonomy. This new home, described as a bright and cheerful space, became her own domain. Imagine the scent of something delicious coming from the kitchen of her new home, and the sight of a fire burning cheerfully in the grate, providing immediate comfort and warmth upon arrival. It was a space she could arrange and manage, finally signalling a new level of domestic autonomy, a quiet revolution in personal agency, and a stark contrast to the bland and limited daily fare she'd become accustomed to. Emerging from the subtle revolution of domestic autonomy, the daily diet in Victorian homes presented another stark reality. It was generally basic, often monotonous, and constrained by both availability and social expectations. Breakfast, for instance, typically consisted of porridge with a small, carefully rationed amount of cream and toast. It was designed to be filling, yes, but remarkably bland, a testament to a diet driven more by necessity and seasonal availability than by culinary delight. You'd likely start your day with a cup of tea perhaps, strong enough to strip paint, a necessary stimulant to fully awaken and face the day's chill, providing a sharp contrast to the plainness of the porridge. The pervasive use of corsets, those rigid, indispensable garments of Victorian fashion, directly impacted eating habits. Designed to achieve the fashionable hourglass silhouette, they imposed significant discomfort, restricting breathing and exerting a constant, subtle pressure around the ribs. This meant large meals were simply uncomfortable, even painful, encouraging lighter, more careful consumption. Imagine the sensation of someone's got their hands wrapped around your waist, squeezing gently but persistently, and the literal inability to take deep breathing, forcing you to take small, careful breaths. This wasn't merely a stylistic choice. It was a tangible effect on daily bodily functions, a constant physical reminder of fashion's power. Food sources were heavily reliant on the season, meaning a much less varied diet than we enjoy today. Fresh fruits and vegetables were scarce outside their specific harvest times, making methods like pickling vegetables crucial for sustenance through the leaner months. This heavy dependence on seasonal produce and preservation techniques indicates a dietary landscape far removed from the abundant choices of modern supermarkets. The lack of refrigeration, too, meant that meat and dairy had to be consumed quickly or cured, further limiting options. However, grand celebrations like wedding breakfast offered a rare, dazzling escape from this daily monotony. These were spectacles of culinary abundance, featuring elaborate feasts with roasted fowl, glazed ham, and multi-tiered cakes starkly contrasting with the simple daily fare. It was a moment of permitted indulgence, a lavish display of wealth and celebration, highlighting the special nature of such events and the rigid distinction between everyday subsistence and ceremonial plenty. Yet even as special occasions offered brief respite, the relentless daily physical ordeal of hygiene and personal care continued, a constant reminder of the era's limitations. Beyond the constraints of diet and the limited domestic comforts, daily hygiene and personal care in Victorian England presented a constant physical ordeal marked by practicality and the absence of modern conveniences. Basic ablutions involved fundamental practices, often without the luxury of hot running water or modern bathing facilities that we take for granted. Cold washes performed with a basin and pitcher were the norm, particularly in the mornings, relying on maids for assistance with the heavy jugs of water. Imagine the shock of cold water on your skin in an unheated room, a brisk, invigorating yet rather uncomfortable start to the day. At the core of a Victorian woman's daily physical reality was the ever-present corset. This indispensable yet physically demanding garment was a constant companion from a young age. Designed to achieve the fashionable hourglass silhouette, it imposed significant discomfort, restricting breathing and exerting a constant subtle pressure around the ribs. You literally could not take a truly deep breath, being forced to rely on small, careful breaths throughout the day. This wasn't merely a fashion statement, it was a daily physical ordeal, a continuous bodily reminder of the era's aesthetic demands. The importance of fashionable paleness also dictated daily routines. A pale complexion was highly desired, signifying a lady of leisure who did not perform outdoor labour, thereby reinforcing her social status. This ideal influenced everything from avoiding direct sunlight to the use of wide-brimmed hats and parasols when outdoors. It subtly but firmly established social distinctions based on appearance, a silent judgment passed on those whose complexion suggested a life of manual toil. Finally, the elaborate ritual of hairstyling consumed a significant portion of a lady's morning. This intricate and time-consuming process was often performed by a housemaid, involving countless pins, careful partings, and the meticulous arrangement of curls into an elaborate style. The visual symmetry and precision of the coiffure were not just about beauty. They were a mark of respectability and strict adherence to social norms. Every strand had to be in place, every curl perfect, contributing to the flawlessly groomed image required for public presentation. This daily investment in appearance, though laborious, was a fundamental part of a Victorian woman's role, embodying the weight of expectations that define daily labour and responsibilities, even for those who weren't performing manual tasks. The meticulous grooming rituals and the daily physical constraints were merely a prelude to the overarching weight of expectations that defined daily labour and responsibilities in Victorian society, even for those not engaged in manual toil. While a middle-class lady might not have wielded a broom or scrubbed floors, her labour was no less demanding. It simply manifested in different forms. For servants, however, the demands were relentless and physically arduous. Imagine Mary the housemaid described as rising at 5 a.m. carrying dozens of 30-pound coal scuttles up and down stairs, her hands black with soot and favouring a strained shoulder from the constant exertion. This micro-narrative example vividly illustrates the taxing, relentless nature of domestic service, a world of perpetual motion and physical strain that rarely ceased. For the middle-class mistress, her daily labour involved the demanding administrative and managerial tasks of running a household. This wasn't a leisure activity. It was a full-time role. It included overseeing the staff, ensuring they performed their duties efficiently and quietly, managing complex household budgets down to the last farthing, meticulously planning meals, and coordinating a daunting schedule of social obligations from receiving callers to hosting dinner parties. This was a complex set of responsibilities requiring sharp organisational skills, an eye for detail, and immense patience, distinctly different from manual toil but equally consuming. Our protagonist, after marriage, immersed herself in learning household management skills from menu planning to linen care, recognising it as a complex but deeply satisfying new form of daily labour. It was a domain where her intellect and organisational prowess were truly tested and valued. Adding to this domestic burden was the continuous battle against urban grime. Living in London meant a perpetual fight against pollution, a struggle against the pervasive soot and dirt that permeated every surface. Tasks like sweeping the front steps twice daily because of all the coal smoke and horse droppings in the street were not one-off chores, but perpetual necessities highlighting the demanding nature of maintaining cleanliness in the relentlessly dirty Victorian city. This wasn't just about appearances. It was about health and order in a chaotic environment. Every clean surface, every swept pathway was a small victory against the tide of urban filth. This ceaseless labour, whether physical or managerial, underscored the practical and demanding nature of Victorian life, shaping childhoods and education for a predetermined future. The relentless daily labours and pervasive societal expectations began shaping individuals from their earliest years, ensuring that childhood and education were meticulously calibrated to prepare for a predetermined future. For girls in particular, education was highly practical and profoundly gender-specific, designed almost exclusively to prepare them for their future roles as wives and mothers. This curriculum rarely ventured into the abstract or the purely academic. Instead, it focused heavily on social accomplishments, think polished deportment, conversational grace, and a smattering of polite arts alongside the essential domestic skills of household management. Our protagonist's education, including French and drawing and enough mathematics to manage household accounts, directly reflected this utilitarian nature of female learning. It was about practicality, not academic rigour, ensuring she would be a competent mistress of her own home. Despite this prescribed curriculum, the human spirit, ever curious, occasionally harboured secret intellectual ambitions or desires that were considered unconventional, even rebellious. Imagine our protagonist's frustration with the limits placed on women's education, or her secret ambition to travel to exotic lands, perhaps to Bombay as Thomas had, or to learn to paint with real skill beyond mere accomplishment. These quiet aspirations, often nurtured in the solitude of her thoughts, or expressed only in the most guarded correspondence, highlighted the inherent tension between rigid societal expectations and individual burgeoning intellectual curiosity. It was a subtle internal form of dissent, a yearning for a broader horizon than the domestic sphere allowed. Childhood experiences themselves were deeply shaped by the family's social class, with children being prepared for their future roles from a very young age. This included early lessons in social decorum, understanding the nuances of address, and internalizing their fixed place in the intricate societal structure. A child from a respectable middle-class family would be taught to defer to elders, to understand the importance of reputation, and to recognize the long-term goal of a suitable marriage. They were miniature adults learning the rules of a complex game they would play for the rest of their lives. These early lessons, though often gentle, laid the unyielding groundwork for the foundational realities and overarching structures that universally constrained existence in this Victorian world. Having explored the personal and daily realities of Victorian life and the intricate dance of courtship, we now firmly establish the foundational macro-level context, the immutable social structures, economic underpinnings and environmental realities that universally constrained existence in this Victorian dating world. At the very top of this pervasive framework was the inescapable social hierarchy, a system where one's birthright largely determined their entire life trajectory, a fixed destiny that dictated every path. Though the days of literal shoguns and daimyo were long past in England, the underlying principle remained the same: power flowed downwards from the aristocracy and landed gentry through the burgeoning middle classes to the vast working poor and the ever-present underclass. For women, this predetermined role was particularly stark. Marriage was their sole acceptable future. At 22, our protagonist keenly felt the immense pressure of this reality, understanding that her entire future hinges on one thing: finding a suitable husband. This wasn't hyperbole. It was the unvarnished truth of a society where a woman's economic security, social standing, and indeed her very purpose were inextricably linked to her marital prospects. It exemplifies how societal structure dictated personal destiny with an almost unyielding force. Navigating the nuances of this class system was crucial even within the broad strata. Our protagonist's family, part of the respectable middle class due to a small but successful haberdashery shop, occupied a fascinating position. They had enough money for decent clothes and food, but not enough to be completely idle. This offered a certain level of comfort, but it came tethered with specific social obligations and anxieties, particularly the aspiration for upward mobility through a strategic marriage. Every family decision, from the meticulous budgeting for daily expenses to the grand expenditure on a wedding dress, a garment that cost more than your father's shop earns in 2 months, was heavily influenced by the constant need to maintain or subtly improve social standing. It was a pervasive unspoken burden, but also a driving force, ensuring that the wheels of courtship, guided by financial realities and the ever-present threat of disease and pollution, kept turning. And so, as the faint echoes of bustling Victorian London begin to fade, and the whispers of strict social protocols grow softer in your mind, allow yourself to gently drift back to the quiet comfort of your own time. We've journeyed through parlours and crowded streets, felt the chill of unheated homes, and witnessed the intricate, often terrifying dance of courtship through a young woman's eyes. It was a world of rigid expectations where every gesture was a word, and every word was a delicate performance, a life lived under the constant scrutiny of a society that valued propriety above all else. Consider for a moment the immense pressure on her to find a suitable husband, not just for love, but for economic survival and social standing. Ponder the intricate art of conversation, the silent language of a fan, or the quiet intimacy found in a carefully penned letter, away from the watchful eyes of a chaperone. Contrast that with the easy freedoms we often take for granted today. The spontaneous conversations, the simple act of holding hands without social censure, the vast spectrum of choices open to modern women. It was a world where even a simple handshake carried immense weight, and the thought of independent ambition was often a secret cherished dream. As you settle deeper into your pillow, let these historical details become mere background hums fading into the peaceful silence. The clatter of horse hooves, the scent of coal smoke, the rustle of voluminous skirts, all now part of a distant, captivating past. You can rest easy knowing that your journey through that complex, fascinating era is complete. Allow your mind to clear, embracing the calm stillness of the present. The intricate dance of Victorian courtship is done, and now it's simply time for you to find your own peace.